Millions of families open the same familiar box every holiday season. Bright streets, tiny metal tokens, stacks of colorful money. The goal is simple: buy everything, bankrupt everyone else, and become the richest player at the table. It is one of the most recognized board games on Earth, yet the woman who invented it never intended for anyone to win that way. She designed the game to prove that monopolies destroy ordinary people. The version the world fell in love with was the exact opposite of what she created.
The cardboard box sits on living room tables across the world. Children argue over who gets the racing car or the thimble. Parents quietly calculate rents while someone else draws a chance card that changes the entire balance of power. Somewhere in the middle of a long evening, a player lands on a property loaded with hotels, and the room falls into that familiar mixture of laughter and quiet dread. That moment of sudden, crushing defeat feels almost inevitable. The game is called Monopoly. Most people never question why it exists or what it was originally meant to teach. In the early years of the 20th century, a quiet, determined woman in the United States was searching for a way to explain an economic idea that few people wanted to hear. She believed that the private ownership of land and the collection of rent created a system that funneled wealth upward while leaving the majority struggling. She was not a professional economist. She worked as a stenographer and a writer. She was also a passionate follower of a political philosophy that argued the value created by land belonged, in some fundamental way, to the community rather than to private landlords alone. She designed a board game to make the argument visible and concrete. Players moved around a square path of properties. One set of rules rewarded the creation of monopolies and the extraction of ever higher rents until opponents were ruined. The other set of rules demonstrated a different possible outcome. When the benefits of land were shared more broadly through a form of taxation, the game produced greater overall prosperity instead of concentrated wealth. She called it the Landlord's game. The year was 1904. She received a United States patent for the design. The game circulated quietly among progressive circles, Quaker communities, college campuses, and small groups of people interested in economic reform. Handmade boards appeared in different cities. The rules were sometimes adjusted by the people who played it. The core message remained consistent. The system that allowed a few players to own everything and charge the rest for the privilege of existing was not inevitable. It was a choice shaped by law and custom. For years, the game remained a niche teaching tool rather than a commercial product. Versions of it traveled through academic and reformist networks. Some players emphasized the monopolist rules as a warning. Others preferred the alternative structure that illustrated a different economic arrangement. The inventor continued to refine the concept and later secured an updated patent. She hoped the game would help ordinary people see the mechanics of wealth concentration more clearly than abstract pamphlets or lectures ever could. Decades later, during the Great Depression, a different man encountered a version of the game. He was unemployed at the time. He played it with friends in the Atlantic City area. He saw commercial potential in the entertainment value of the competitive rules. He refined the board, assigned street names drawn from that coastal city, added the now familiar tokens, and began producing handmade sets to sell. Demand grew faster than he could keep up with. He approached a major game publisher with the idea. The company initially hesitated. Board games were not an obvious priority in the middle of an economic crisis. Yet the sets kept selling. The publisher eventually bought the rights and began mass production under a new name, Monopoly. The version that reached department store shelves and catalog pages no longer contained two sets of rules. Only one remained. The version that rewarded aggressive acquisition, rent extraction, and the elimination of opponents. The original inventor's name disappeared from the packaging. The economic lesson she had carefully built into the design was inverted. What had been a critique of concentrated wealth became a celebration of it.
The company later purchased the remaining patent rights from the original inventor for a relatively modest sum. By then, the commercial version was already becoming a cultural phenomenon. During the hardest economic years of the century, people sat around kitchen tables and pretended to become landlords and railroad barons. The game offered a fantasy of control and sudden fortune at a time when real economic security felt unreachable for many families. It also quietly trained players in a particular logic: buy early, expand aggressively, extract rent, and remove competitors from the board. The inventor lived long enough to see her creation transformed into something she had not intended. Historical records indicate she received limited ongoing recognition and limited financial return relative to the enormous commercial success the game eventually achieved. She continued to speak, when given the opportunity, about the original purpose of the design. Yet the public story had already shifted. The popular narrative credited the man who commercialized the Depression-era version as the primary creator. For years, that simplified origin story was the one most consumers knew and repeated. And if you think the story ends with a simple case of one inventor being overshadowed by a more successful marketer, stay with me, because the deeper tension is not only about credit, it is about what happens when a tool designed to reveal a structural problem becomes the cultural celebration of that same problem. The game's commercial rise coincided with an era in which large corporations already dominated major sectors of the American economy. Real monopolies and near monopolies in oil, steel, railroads, finance, and other industries had shaped political debates for decades. Antitrust legislation existed. Public arguments about concentrated economic power continued in newspapers and legislatures. Yet, inside millions of homes, children and adults learned through play that the player who controlled the most property and charged the highest rents was the clear winner. The educational critique had been replaced by an entertaining simulation of the very dynamics it was meant to question. Later research by historians, journalists, and independent investigators recovered the earlier history in greater detail. Archival patents, correspondence, contemporary newspaper accounts, and surviving handmade boards confirmed the original inventor's central role and the progressive intentions behind the dual-rule structure. Some of the pre-commercial versions that circulated in the 1910s and 1920s still carried both sets of rules. The mass-market product that dominated shelves and living rooms did not. The company that owned the rights eventually acknowledged aspects of the earlier history in limited public statements, but the dominant cultural image of the game remained largely unchanged for decades. The metal tokens, the chance and community chest cards, the brightly colored property groups, the little green houses and red hotels, all of these became global symbols of playful competition and family ritual. The darker and more political origin remained mostly unknown outside of specialized historical writing and the occasional investigative article. Generations of players absorbed the rules, the strategies, and the emotional experience of sudden bankruptcy without ever hearing that the board had once been constructed as a teaching device for an economic philosophy opposed to the outcome the modern game rewards. The transformation was not the result of a single dramatic conspiracy. It was the cumulative effect of commercial opportunity, selective storytelling, and the marketplace's preference for the more entertaining and less challenging version of the rules. A progressive demonstration tool created to expose the human consequences of land monopolies was absorbed, simplified, and sold back to the public as pure recreation. The woman who built the first patented version watched her invention become a cultural icon that celebrated the opposite of what she had hoped to illustrate. In later decades, legal and historical disputes brought pieces of the story back into public view. Researchers and activists pointed to the patent records and the earlier circulating versions. The commercial owners of the game defended their rights and their long-established brand. The popular understanding of Monopoly's origins slowly expanded beyond the simplified Depression-era creation myth, yet the game itself continued to be played under the same single set of rules that had made it famous. Today, the same box still appears under Christmas trees, at birthday parties, and in college dorm rooms. The rules printed inside the lid are still the rules of accumulation and elimination. The goal is still to own everything possible and charge the highest rents. The original inventor's vision of an alternative economic demonstration is rarely mentioned during ordinary play, yet every time a player is forced into bankruptcy by an opponent's well-developed monopoly, the game is performing the exact demonstration she designed more than a century earlier. Only now, most participants treat it as entertainment rather than as a warning about real-world systems. The cardboard, the brightly colored money, the tiny plastic buildings, and the metal tokens remain ordinary household objects. The history attached to them is not ordinary. A carefully constructed teaching device intended to reveal the costs of concentrated economic power was reshaped by commercial forces into one of the most successful celebrations of that same power. The woman who patented the first version received far less lasting recognition than the scale of the game's success might suggest. The company that popularized the simplified commercial edition built one of the most enduring board game franchises in modern history. The next time the board is unfolded and the tokens are chosen, the familiar ritual continues. Someone will collect rent. Someone else will mortgage properties in a desperate attempt to stay in the game. The room will fill with the usual mixture of competitive energy, laughter, and frustration. Very few players will know that the entire experience was once designed to make them ask a different and more uncomfortable question. What kind of economic arrangement produces winners who can only succeed by making everyone else lose? That question still sits, mostly unnoticed, inside the box. If this hidden history changed the way you look at the game sitting on so many shelves, consider subscribing for more stories that sit just beneath the surface of everyday objects. Leave a like if you want these investigations to keep coming, and tell me in the comments, after learning how Monopoly began, would you still play it the same way, or would knowing the original purpose change anything for you?